Deconstruction of the mechanisms. Defining human position in the social hierarchy. Introductory word of the mentor. True strength is not the absence of feelings, but the ability to be their impartial master. Most people live their lives in the mode of a reactive automaton. They respond to external pressure either with aggression or, which occurs more frequently and is more destructive, with self-justification. When you begin to explain your motives, you subconsciously acknowledge the power of the person to whom you are explaining them. You give them the right to judge whether your reasons are sufficiently weighty. From the perspective of neurobiology and ethology, justification is a signal of submission, an attempt to appease the leader or the pack. We, however, shall consider self-possession as the architecture of sovereignty. Nietzsche taught that a free man is one who is not afraid of being misunderstood. We shall go further and study how to use misunderstanding as a tool for controlling distance and preserving internal resources. Module number 1. The asymmetry of explanations and the architecture of sovereignty. 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. A family dinner in a country house near London. Eleanor, 32 years old, cold-blooded, analytical mind, sits opposite her brother Marcus, 38 years old, prone to dominance through moralizing. Marcus. His pupils are slightly dilated. His tone is raised by 15%. Eleanor, I heard you rejected the offer from Singapore. That was the chance of a decade. You must explain to the family why you are behaving so irresponsibly. We were all counting on your relocation. Eleanor slowly lowers her utensils. The sound of steel meeting porcelain is barely audible. She does not shift her gaze to him immediately. Instead, she makes a pause of 3.5 seconds, a duration sufficient for Marcus to feel discomfort from his own question. Eleanor. Voice steady, 60 decibels, absence of microtension in the orbicularis oculi muscle. I have made my decision, Marcus. That fact is sufficient. Internal analysis of Eleanor. His prefrontal cortex is currently searching for a hook. He expects me to start listing reasons, taxes, personal connections, logistics. Every because of mine would become a point of attack for him. I observe the pulsation of the vein on his neck. He is trapped in the snare of his own expectation. Marcus clenches his glass, his knuckles turn pale. Sufficient? You simply say sufficient. Do you even understand how this looks from the outside? You are obligated to argue your position. Eleanor looks him directly in the bridge of the nose. She sees his attempt to provoke a cortisol release in her. She takes a sip of water. Eleanor, my decision is a full stop, not the beginning of a discussion. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this scene, we observe a collision of two behavioral models, hierarchical aggression and cognitive sovereignty. The limbic response and the justification trap. When Marcus demands explanations, he activates, in theory, a social anxiety reaction in Eleanor. In the course of evolution, expulsion from the tribe meant death. Therefore, the brain developed a need to be understood to maintain status within the group. Justification is an attempt to lower the level of aggression from a fellow tribesman. Cognitive reappraisal. Eleanor uses the observer technique. She does not perceive the words of Marcus as a personal attack. She classifies them as an attempt to restore control through verbal pressure. Social hierarchy. The one who asks questions is in the position of a judge. The one who answers, justifies themselves, is in the position of the defendant. The refusal of Eleanor to provide arguments severs this connection. She maintains informational asymmetry, leaving Marcus in a state of cognitive dissonance. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. To understand why Eleanor resists pressure so effectively, let us turn to the classic experiment of Solomon Asch on conformity, 1951. In the course of the study, a subject was asked to compare the lengths of lines. All other participants were Confederates and intentionally gave incorrect answers. Result: 75% of participants agreed at least once with the obviously false opinion of the majority so as not to feel like a black sheep and to avoid explaining their position. Connection to the situation. Marcus acts as an agent of social approval. He pressures Eleanor, forcing her to meet the expectations of the group, the family. However, neurobiological research shows that in individuals with high cognitive flexibility, the zones responsible for emotional regulation are activated alongside the prefrontal cortex when making independent decisions. Eleanor demonstrates resilience to the herd effect, understanding that any explanation is a step toward conformity. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key, control principle. Number 1. The law of informational silence. If you have performed an action that you consider correct, any subsequent justification before a critic reduces the value of that action by 50%. An explanation is a bargaining chip that you pay for the right to be yourself. A strong person does not pay this tax. Mindset. Your right to a decision does not depend on the ability of those around you to understand or approve of that decision. Silence is the highest form of status. How to apply. In response to a demand for explanations, use closed constructions. This is my final decision. I have considered all factors. The topic is closed. Do not add because. 5. Stage. Static atmosphere. A cold, transparent silence falls upon the dining room. Eleanor sees Marcus avert his gaze first. Dust motes dance slowly in a beam of evening light falling on the polished oak of the table. The world did not collapse because a reason was not named. On the contrary, it became more orderly. The chaos of the expectations of others shattered against the granite wall of a single, calm refusal. Module number 2. Inversion of resistance and affective sovereignty 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. A conference hall of an investment company in the city. Panoramic windows overlook the Thames. Caleb, 42 years old, senior partner, sits at the head of the table. Opposite him is Julian, 35 years old, ambitious but impulsive manager, whose strategy has just led to a loss of 8% of the fund assets in 1 week. Julian. His voice vibrates at high frequencies. His face is covered with red spots, the result of a sharp rush of blood. Caleb, this was your idea with the hedging. We lost millions. You sit here with an expression as if nothing has happened. You must admit your mistake before the board right now. Caleb does not change his posture. His back forms a straight line at an angle of 10 degrees relative to the back of the chair. He observes a drop of sweat rolling down the temple of Julian. Caleb. The pause lasts exactly 7 seconds, voice deep, resonating in the chest. Your decibel load exceeds the norm, Julian. It interferes with the calculation of probabilities. Internal analysis of Caleb. I record his attempt to shift the burden of guilt. His amygdala has completely seized control over the prefrontal cortex. He is not looking for a solution. He is looking for an object for an emotional discharge. My task is to remain at absolute zero temperature, against which his affect will shatter. Julian strikes the table with his palm. The sound resonates throughout the hall. Are you mocking me? Give me an answer. Why are you silent? Caleb slightly tilts his head to the left by 5 degrees, studying Julian like a curious biological specimen. Caleb. An answer requires silence. You are not yet capable of providing it. When your cortisol returns to normal, we shall return to the figures. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this interaction, Caleb demonstrates cognitive reframing and inhibition of mirror neurons. Emotional contagion. Julian unconsciously tries to involve Caleb in his state of panic. If Caleb begins to justify himself or becomes angry in response, his brain will also begin to produce stress hormones, leading to the loss of analytical advantage. Limbic capture. Julian is in a state of fight or flight. Caleb, in contrast, uses parasympathetic activation through a controlled slowing of the heart rate. Status asymmetry. The demand for an answer is an attempt by Julian to become the leader in the hierarchical dance. By maintaining silence and pointing out the biological state of the opponent, the mention of cortisol, Caleb instantly dehumanizes the attack, transforming it from a social conflict into a medical fact. 3. Stage, scientific validation. To deconstruct the behavior of Caleb, it is necessary to consider the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory of emotion, 1962. In the course of the experiment, subjects were injected with epinephrine, adrenaline, which causes physiological arousal. One group knew about the side effects while the second did not. Subjects from the second group read the context of the environment. If an aggressive person was nearby, they felt anger. If a cheerful person was nearby, they felt joy. Result: emotion is a cognitive interpretation of physical arousal. Connection to the situation. Caleb understands that the anger of Julian is merely biological noise. Caleb refuses to label this noise as a social threat. He interprets the aggression of Julian as a system malfunction, which allows him to remain a cold observer rather than a participant in the drama. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key, control principle. Number 2. The right to a cognitive pause. Never answer a question asked in a state of affect. The person who demands an immediate answer is trying to impose their heart rate upon you. Your task is to force their heart to beat in time with your tranquility. Mindset. Any attempt to force you to justify yourself is an offer to voluntarily descend to a lower hierarchical level. Remain at the peak of your impartiality. How to apply. If you are pressured, use the technique of mechanical description. Describe the state of the opponent. For example, I see that you are currently on edge, but do not comment on the substance of their claims until the level of tension drops to 0. 5. Stage, static atmosphere. Julian breathes heavily, but his shoulders slowly lower. A sterile purity remains in the hall. Caleb sees the reflection of skyscrapers in the steel casing of his laptop. Order is restored. The anger of Julian found no support and dissolved in the cold air of the office, leaving behind only the light scent of ozone from the functioning air conditioners. Module number 3. The geometry of guilt and the law of sovereign will. 1. Stage, the scenario, the observation. A city park at dusk. Silas, 38 years old, emotionally autonomous, walks along an alley with Clara, 34 years old, a long-time acquaintance prone to passive aggression. Clara, her pace is intentionally slowed, her head is slightly tilted, imitating the posture of a victim. Silas, I cannot believe that you will not come to the charity evening next Saturday. I helped you so much with that project last year. I literally sacrificed my weekends. Do you not feel that it is now your turn to support me? Silas continues his movement, maintaining the rhythm, exactly 90 steps per minute. His gaze is directed forward, at the horizon line. Silas, voice devoid of modulated fluctuations, emphasized as dry. Your help last year was your voluntary choice, Clara. My absence from the evening is mine. These are two independent events. Internal analysis of Silas. She is trying to activate the neural network responsible for social exchange. Her strategy is reciprocity turned into a weapon. She wants me to feel cognitive dissonance between the image of a good friend and my refusal. I observe how she purses her lips, a sure sign of suppressed anger from a failed manipulation. Clara stops, forcing him to stop as well, and looks from the bottom up. This is simply selfish. You owe me, Silas. Simply admit it and explain why your time is more important than my investment in you. Silas stops. He does not reduce the distance, maintaining exactly 1 meter of space between them. Silas. The word owe in this context is a logical error. I did not give consent to this credit. I shall not justify my schedule. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this scene, Silas demonstrates immunity to the induction of guilt and the exploitation of the ethics of reciprocity. The principle of reciprocity, a fundamental rule of society that forces us to respond to kindness with kindness. However, manipulators use it to create an unequal exchange. Help that was not requested is often used as a lever to obtain what the manipulator needs. Evolutionary fear of isolation. Clara appeals to morality to activate the selfish label in Silas. In a primitive society, this label led to expulsion. Silas recognizes this as a biological rudiment and deactivates it through a logical audit. Rejection of determinism. Justifying himself to Clara would mean recognizing her right to establish the rules of exchange. Silas uses the approach of Nietzsche. He himself is the source of his values and does not need the approval of the moral court of those around him. 3. Stage, scientific validation. To analyze the behavior of Silas, it is necessary to consider the classic experiment of Dennis Regan, 1971, on the study of reciprocity norms. In the experiment, a Confederate bought a bottle of Coca-Cola for a subject, an unsolicited favor, and then asked them to buy lottery tickets. Result: subjects who received the drink bought twice as many tickets as those who were offered nothing, even if they felt a dislike for the person asking. Connection to the situation. Clara is trying to use the Coca-Cola effect. She reminds him of past help to create psychological pressure. Silas, however, disavows this connection, pointing out that any unsolicited help is the risk of the person providing it, not an obligation for the person receiving it. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key. Control principle, number 3. Veto on emotional accounts payable. Never let the past define your present without your conscious consent. If someone helped you without signing a contract on the terms of return, it was a gift, not a loan. Gifts do not require justifications upon the refusal of a reciprocal service. Mindset. Your freedom ends where your desire to justify your choice in the face of the expectations of others begins. Justification is a signature on a promissory note that you are not obligated to pay. How to apply? If you are reproached for ingratitude, respond, I value your action in the past, but it does not deprive me of the right to manage my present. 5. Stage, static atmosphere. The air in the park becomes cold and transparent. Silas sees the lanterns light up according to a strict geometric pattern, cutting through the darkness. Clara is silent. Her emotional impulse has frozen, having met no resistance. The universe of Silas remains orderly, clear of the sticky threads of the manipulations of others. He continues his path in a silence that no one dares to break anymore. Module 4. Deconstruction of Authority and Vertical Autonomy. 1. Stage, the scenario, the observation. An office on the 44th floor of a skyscraper made of glass and steel. The interior is designed in cold gray tones. Marcus, 55 years old, general director with an authoritarian management style, stands by the window, his back to the person who has entered. Caleb, 32 years old, lead analyst, stands by the table. Marcus, without turning around, his voice sounds muffled, creating an effect of artificial significance. Caleb, I have reviewed your report on the merger. You excluded from it 3 key assets on which I insisted. The entire board of directors is in bewilderment. I expect from you a very detailed, step-by-step explanation of why you decided to go against my direct directive. Marcus slowly turns around. His chin is slightly raised, which on a biological level is an attempt to increase the visual size of the body and dominate the space. Caleb maintains immobility. His hands lie calmly along his body, fingers not intertwined. The absence of locks signals a low level of stress. Caleb. The pause is exactly 5 seconds. The gaze is focused on the bridge of the nose of Marcus. The voice sounds monotonous and confident. My report is based on a mathematical risk model. The data excludes these assets as toxic. This is the final analytical product. Internal analysis of Caleb. I observe his attempt to use the argument to authority. His phrase, "the entire board is in bewilderment," is a classic appeal to the mass, an attempt to make my limbic system feel the fear of expulsion from the hierarchy. I record the micro-tension in his brow ridges. He expects that I will begin to justify myself, referring to charts and calculations, thereby recognizing his right to a subjective assessment of my competence. I remain in the field of facts, depriving him of emotional fodder. Marcus takes a step toward Caleb, invading his personal space to a distance of 30 centimeters. You did not hear me. I did not ask about models. I asked, on what basis did you ignore my order? Explain yourself. Caleb does not retreat a single centimeter, does not blink. The basis is the objective inefficiency of these assets. To explain the calculations which are already presented in the appendix to the report on 80 pages would be an excessive waste of your time, Marcus. The decision remains in force. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this episode, we see a conflict of status dominance and expert sovereignty. Hierarchical stress. When a person standing higher in rank demands explanations, they activate in the subordinate an ancient mechanism of reporting to the leader. The brain of Caleb could have chosen the strategy of appeasing the aggressor, justification, to reduce the risk of dismissal, social death. Neurochemistry of calmness. Caleb uses the technique of cognitive distancing. He perceives Marcus not as a threatening boss, but as a source of sound waves requiring data. This suppresses the activity of the amygdala and allows the prefrontal cortex to maintain control over the speech apparatus. Territorial marker. The refusal of Caleb to retreat when Marcus violated his boundaries is a powerful nonverbal signal. In biology, an individual who does not change their posture when a dominant approaches declares their high internal status and readiness to protect resources. 3. Stage, scientific validation. To deeply understand the mechanics of resisting authority, it is necessary to consider the experiment of Stanley Milgram, 1961. In the course of the study, subjects, in the role of teachers, were ordered to deliver electric shocks to students for errors. Result: 65% of participants reached the maximum voltage of 450 volts simply because a person in a white coat, the authority, said, "The experiment requires that you continue." Many of them cried and justified themselves while doing so, but continued to obey. Connection to the situation. Marcus uses the same mechanism. He pressures with status, demanding that Caleb betray his professional logic. However, Caleb demonstrates a rare type of non-obeying subject behavior. He understands that the authority of Marcus is a social construct that loses power as soon as the subordinate refuses to play the game of crime and justification. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. Control principle. Number 4. Autonomy of competence. Your professional result speaks for itself. Any attempt to force you to explain why you did your job well, but not the way the boss wanted, is a hidden form of humiliation. Justification in such a situation is an admission that the will of the superior is more important than objective reality. Mindset. If your decision is based on facts, it does not need protection. By defending yourself, you make the facts vulnerable. Stand on the result as on a foundation, and allow authority itself to adapt to reality. How to apply. Use the formula, reference to the product. Instead of explanations, say, all the argumentation is contained in the final document, or the result confirms the correctness of the chosen path. Do not allow the discussion to be moved from the plane of facts to the plane of relationships and obedience. 5. Stage. Static atmosphere. A dead, sterile silence is established in the office. Sunlight passing through the double glazing falls on the carpet in a clear, cold rectangle. Marcus looks at Caleb, and in this gaze, anger is slowly replaced by forced respect. The strength of Caleb is not in aggression, but in his absolute, unshakable transparency. He is a rock against which the wave of the will of another shatters. Order is restored through the refusal of compromise. Module number 5, Social Ostracism and the Architecture of Independence 1. Stage, the scenario, the observation, a closed terrace of an elite club. Evening. A group of 5 people, former colleagues and friends, sit in a semicircle. In the center of attention is Eleanor, 32 years old, maintaining absolute immobility. Opposite her is Sarah, 34 years old, the informal leader of the group, using moral superiority as a lever. Sarah. Voice sounds with feigned concern, head tilt to the right by 15 degrees, an imitation of sympathy. Eleanor, we are all here in bewilderment. You did not come to the farewell evening for Thomas, even though you knew how important it was for the company. People say that you have become arrogant. We simply want to understand, why did you ignore us all? You must explain your action, otherwise it looks like disrespect toward our shared values. The other members of the group nod in unison. A social ring effect is created. Eleanor slowly moves her gaze from one face to another. She notices that Thomas averts his eyes, while Marcus crosses his arms over his chest. Eleanor. The pause is exactly 6 seconds. She does not adjust her dress and does not touch her glass. Total economy of movement. My absence is a completed fact. Your interpretation of this fact is your internal work. Internal analysis of Eleanor. A classic attempt at tribal pressure. Sarah uses we to amplify the weight of her attack. She is trying to cause a surge of social shame in me, a mechanism that, in ancient times, forced an individual to obey the will of the pack. I observe how her nostrils flare. She expects justifications to begin the trading of my forgiveness. I shall not give her this opportunity. Sarah. Voice becomes harder, the pace of speech accelerates. That is not an answer, Eleanor. We are all friends here. You are behaving as if you are above us. Explain yourself normally, or we will have to reconsider your participation in our future projects. Eleanor. Voice sounds at the same frequency as in the beginning. Reconsider it. My decision does not require translation into the language of your expectations. 2. Stage. Psychological scan. System analysis. In this scene, Eleanor faces the induction of collective guilt and the threat of social ostracism, tribalism, and the fear of expulsion. The human brain is evolutionarily programmed to fear the disapproval of the group. When Sarah says "we," she activates neural circuits in the listener associated with physical pain. Social rejection is perceived by the brain almost the same as a knife wound. Diffusion of responsibility. Sarah hides behind the backs of the group, which allows her to be more aggressive. Eleanor, by refusing to justify herself, destroys this mechanic. She moves the conflict from the plane of one against all to the plane of sovereign against the system. Emotional regulation. Eleanor suppresses the amygdala, the center of fear, through conscious observation of the process. She sees in Sarah not a friend, but an operator of a social protocol. This deprives the attack of Sarah of its emotional charge. 3. Stage. Scientific validation. To deconstruct the behavior of the group, it is necessary to consider the experiments of Kipling-Williams with the game Cyberball, 2000. In this study, the subject played a virtual ball game with two other players, the computer. At some point, the other players stopped passing the ball to the subject, completely ignoring them. Result: even knowing that this was simply a computer simulation, the subjects demonstrated a sharp decrease in self-esteem and the activation of brain zones responsible for physical pain. Connection to the situation. Sarah is trying to imitate Cyberball in reality, threatening to exclude Eleanor from the game. Future projects. Most people at this moment begin to justify themselves, to ask for the ball back. Eleanor, however, demonstrates phenomenal resilience. She understands that her value does not depend on whether the group passes her the ball of its approval. 4. Stage. Strategic protocol. The master key. Control principle. Number 5. Immunity to the verdict of the crowd. The group demands justifications not for the sake of truth, but for the sake of confirming its power over you. As soon as you begin to explain why you acted not like everyone else, you recognize their right to judge you. The person who does not justify themselves before the crowd automatically becomes its leader or its most dangerous enemy, but never its slave. Mindset. Your sovereignty ends where your need for the approval of the majority begins. The only person to whom you must give an account is yourself at 3 o'clock in the morning. How to apply. Use the technique of returning responsibility. In response to collective shaming, say, "I understand that you are disappointed, and I accept your right to that feeling. My decision remains unchanged." Do not try to prove that you are good. 5. Stage. Static atmosphere. It becomes perceptibly cooler on the terrace. The wind barely moves the leaves of the decorative plants. Eleanor sees Sarah take a sip of wine, trying to hide her confusion. The group, not having received the expected reaction of the victim, begins to disintegrate. Marcus picks up his phone. Thomas looks at his watch. Eleanor remains in the center, surrounded by an invisible but impenetrable field of her clarity. She is free because she no longer needs to be understood. Module 6. The Architecture of Silence and the Management of Cognitive Deficit 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. A closed library in a private club. Heavy leather armchairs, the scent of old paper and expensive tobacco. Julian, 34 years old, prone to verbal expansion, sits opposite Caleb, 42 years old, master of the pause. Julian, his body leaned forward, fingers nervously tapping the armrest. Caleb, I know that you blocked my participation in the board of directors. I demand explanations. After everything that we have gone through, after all my efforts, you are simply silent? This is, at the very least, disrespectful. Give me at least one reason why I am not suitable. Caleb does not change his posture. He holds a glass of water in his hand, observing the air bubbles rising to the surface. He does not utter a single word. His breathing remains deep and rhythmic, exactly 6 cycles per minute. Julian. Voice becomes higher, notes of hysteria appear in it. Come on, say something. Do you think that if you are silent, the problem will disappear? Your silence is an admission of your wrongdoing. Justify your decision or admit that you are simply afraid of competition. Caleb slowly moves his gaze from the glass to Julian. He looks directly into the pupils of his interlocutor without blinking. 10 seconds pass, then 20. The air in the room seems thick and sticky from the tension of Julian. Caleb, after 30 seconds of silence, voice sounding like a cold steel blade. Your inability to endure 30 seconds of silence is exactly the reason. Internal analysis of Caleb. I observe his disintegration. His brain is desperately trying to fill the void that I have created. He interprets my silence as a threat, and his prefrontal cortex begins to hallucinate, coming up with justifications and accusations. He himself reveals his weak spots, simply because he cannot endure the absence of feedback. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this scene, Caleb applies the tactic of deliberate communicative deficit. Cognitive vacuum. The human brain is a machine for searching for meanings. When we encounter silence in response to a direct request, our neural network begins to feverishly generate hypotheses. Julian, not receiving an answer, begins to justify Caleb himself or attack himself, which leads to the rapid exhaustion of his cognitive resources. Inversion of pressure. By demanding explanations, Julian tries to force Caleb to justify himself. Caleb, however, redirects this pressure back. In social physics, the one who is silent becomes the object around which the discussion revolves. The one who speaks is a satellite trying to find support. Biological marker of dominance. The ability to maintain eye contact without verbal accompaniment is a direct signal of high testosterone and low cortisol. It signals to the opponent that you fully control the situation and do not feel a threat from his aggression. 3. Stage, scientific validation. To deconstruct the effect of silence, it is necessary to consider the famous still face experiment of Edward Tronick, 1975. In this study, a mother first actively interacts with her child and then suddenly makes her face absolutely motionless and devoid of emotions. Result: the child instantly feels acute stress. First, he tries to attract attention, then begins to scream, and eventually falls into a state of deep despair and disorientation. Connection to the situation. Adults react to a still face or total silence in an analogous manner, though in a more complex form. Julian falls into a state of social disorientation. The absence of explanations from Caleb is perceived by his psyche as communicative death, which forces him to lose control and make mistakes. Caleb uses this mechanism to destabilize Julian without exerting any physical or verbal effort. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key, control principle. Number 6, the power of emptiness. Never rush to fill the silence, especially if you are asked to justify yourself. Silence is a space in which your opponent builds their own scaffold. The longer you are silent, the more they reveal of their fears and insecurities. Mindset. Your silence is the most expensive currency. Do not spend it on those who try to buy your tranquility with cheap questions. The one who asks a question is asking. The one who is silent in response is deciding whether to give. How to apply. If you are pressured by a demand to explain yourself, make a pause of 5 to 10 seconds, looking the opponent in the eye. In most cases, they will begin to speak themselves, trying to smooth over the awkwardness and thereby reveal their true motives or retreat. 5. Stage, static atmosphere. A ringing clarity hangs in the library. Julian lowers his gaze, his energy exhausted like a battery in a short circuit. Caleb takes a slow sip of water. Only the steady ticking of the floor clock is heard, counting the seconds of his triumph. The world around him is motionless, devoid of chaos and explanations. This is the triumph of pure will over the vanity of words. Module 7, Synthesis of Amour, Fati, and Radical Subjectivity. 1. Stage. The scenario. The observation. Late evening in a penthouse. Through the windows, a grid of city lights is visible, resembling a microcircuit. Eleanor, 32 years old, stands at the bar. On the table lies a notice of termination of a major contract, the result of her risky decision that did not pay off. Marcus, 55 years old, her mentor and critic, enters. In his hands is a newspaper. His face expresses the triumph of disappointment. Marcus, tone saturated with venom, he makes a pause to enjoy the moment. So, Eleanor, a total collapse. Your strategy cost us 2 years of work. I did not come here to argue. I came to listen to how you are going to explain this. You surely have a list of objective reasons. Eleanor turns around. She does not try to hide the document or make a guilty face. Her eyelids are relaxed, her breathing noiseless. She takes a sip of dry wine, sensing its tartness. Eleanor. Voice sounds clear, without a shadow of vibration. There are no reasons, Marcus. There is only the result, and I accept it entirely. Internal analysis of Eleanor. I record his confusion. He came to see my struggle with reality, my attempt to bargain for forgiveness through explanations. But I am not struggling. This event is already a part of my history. I integrate this failure into my structure. I observe how his need for my guilt finds no hook. I am this fate. Marcus, with bewilderment. You will not even try to defend yourself? You will not say that the market collapsed or that the partners let you down? You simply stand and admit it? Do you even understand how this looks? Eleanor. It looks like reality. Justifications are noise. I prefer the silence of my choice. 2. Stage, psychological scan, system analysis. In this final scene, Eleanor demonstrates a transition from an external locus of control to radical subjectivity. Amor fati, love of fate. This is not passive resignation, but an active affirmation of everything that happens. When you refuse to justify yourself for a failure, you declare, I wanted exactly this outcome since it happened. This deprives those around you of the opportunity to use your mistake against you. Cognitive dissonance of the opponent. Marcus expects the standard scenario of guilt, justification, punishment. Eleanor severs this cycle at the first stage. The absence of justifications makes her invulnerable to criticism, as criticism works only where there is resistance or denial of a fact. Neuroplasticity of acceptance. Instead of activating stress circuits at the thought of failure, the brain of Eleanor activates the prefrontal cortex for the analysis of the next step. She does not waste energy on retrospective simulation, what if, preserving computational power for the future. 3. Stage, scientific validation. To understand the power of this position, let us turn to the concept of the locus of control by Julian Rotter, 1966. In his studies, people were divided into externals, believe in fate, chance, the will of others, and internals, believe that they themselves determine their life. Result: internals possess a much higher resilience to stress, depression, and external pressure. They do not justify themselves because justification is the shifting of responsibility onto external factors, an external approach. Connection to the situation. Eleanor demonstrates an absolute internal locus of control. For her, justification is the recognition that she was a toy in the hands of circumstances. By refusing explanations, she affirms her power over her own life, even if that life is currently full of difficulties. She transforms defeat into a personal triumph of will. 4. Stage, strategic protocol, the master key, control principle. Number 7. The law of final integration. You are everything that happens to you. Your victories and your catastrophes are facets of the same diamond. As soon as you begin to justify yourself for a failure, you split your personality into the good self and the bad circumstances. Become a single whole with your fate. Mindset. Never apologize for your fate. Your mistakes are your scars. Your justifications are your weak spots. Love your fate so much that others have no right to judge it. How to apply. In the event of a failure or mistake, do not search for the guilty and do not list mitigating circumstances. Say, "This is my result. I take full responsibility for it. The next step will be made from this point." This instantly restores your status as the leader of the situation. 5. Stage, static atmosphere. Marcus leaves in silence, closing the door behind him. In the penthouse, a ringing, almost cosmic silence is established. Eleanor looks at the city. She does not feel weight. On the contrary, she feels the lightness of a person who has nothing more to prove, and to whom no one has the right to demand an account. She is the architect of her chaos and her order. The evening air is fresh and clean. The mechanics of self-possession are complete. She is free. Final synthesis. True self-possession is not the suppression of feelings, but their crystallization. A person who has stopped explaining their motives becomes to those around them like a black mirror. They see in them only their own projections, fears, and insecurities, while the person remains cold, even, and impenetrable. Your silence is not emptiness. It is an excess of strength. Your absence of explanations is not rudeness. It is the highest form of honesty before yourself. Your immobility is a point of support around which the reality of other people begins to rotate. Remember, every because of yours is a crack in the armor. Every apology before the person who has no right to judge you is a voluntary renunciation of the throne of your own personality. Statics of completion. Imagine your psyche as an icy plateau under a starless sky. Here there is no place for fuss, no echo of the voices of others, no necessity to prove your right to exist. There is only you, your decisions, and their consequences. This is amor fati, the love of one's fate, elevated to the rank of an absolute strategy. The world will attempt to return you to the state of a reactive automaton. It will provoke, reproach, and appeal to morality. But now you have the keys to all 7 locks. Use them not to wage war, but to never again be a participant in the manipulations of others. Be cold, be precise, be sovereign.